Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today to attend the English webinar, Undergraduate Application Essays. I'm Chizuru Sasada, EducationUSA Advisor in Tokyo. I'll be the MC for today. よろしくお願いいたします。Now, I just quickly introduce about EducationUSA Advising Center. EducationUSA is a U.S. Department of State of Network of Advising Center in more than 170 countries around the world. We promote U.S. higher education by providing accurate, comprehensive, and current information advice about studying at U.S. colleges and universities. And in Japan, we have 6 advising centers, Sapporo, Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka, Fukuoka, and Okinawa. So if you have any questions, please get in touch with the EducationUSA centers nearby. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about our future event. Tomorrow, we will have a webinar on 高校教員対応推薦状について. This is for high school teachers, and this is a precious opportunities for high school teachers to learn about how to write good recommendation letters. So I hope many teachers will join us. In addition, Friday, September 23rd, EducationUSA will have a full college fair inviting many U.S. institutions. As you see, in the morning, we will have an online virtual fair, and in the afternoon, we have the in-person fair. We also provide special seminars inviting high school scholarship organizations and English language test organizations. So I hope you will join them. Okay, now I would like to introduce our 2 wonderful speakers from the United States, Miss Beth Sang from University of Richmond, Virginia, and Miss Mindy Yu, Marian University in Ohio. Thank you so much, Beth Sang and Mindy, for joining us today. Now I'd like to hand it over to you. I will stop sharing my screen. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I hope everyone can see my screen. Mindy and I are absolutely thrilled to have the opportunity to connect with you. It is our evening. I know it's your morning, so bear with us if we say anything funny. It's the hour of the day, but we are really grateful to have the chance to really shed some of the insight into the college essay writing process. We know that it is not a comfortable objective to be asked to speak about yourself. It's a little bit unfamiliar, and for that reason, essay writing tends to be one of the more anxiety-inducing parts of the application process. So if you have started writing, congratulations. If you are not yet sure where to start, we're hoping that this presentation will help you figure out where to begin, and we really do encourage you to use that Q&A box or that chat box to interact with us and ask us questions. So we're hoping that you will be participating with us today. I always like to kind of set the stage and explain why we're qualified to be speaking on this topic. So I know Mindy and I were chatting in preparation to be with you this morning, and I think both of us have spent, Mindy, correct me if I'm wrong, about 11 years at our institutions at the University of Richmond and at Miami University in Ohio. And in a given year, I would estimate that we likely read at least 1,000 college essays. So you can do the math and multiply that by the number of years that we've worked at our institutions, and we've certainly shaped some opinions and some pieces of advice and wisdom that we hope to impart upon you today in the time that we have together. So I don't say that to make you intimidated, but simply to say use us as a resource, because we are so happy to serve in that capacity for you. So we're actually going to take a step back, and this is where we hope that you will use the Q&A to participate with us. And we'd like to have you do just a little bit of reflection. Take a moment and think about one point of confidence that you have when you think about writing a college essay or a university application essay. And then one thing that maybe you're not feeling so confident about, or that might be causing you some anxiety. So if you have a thought that jumps into your head, please put that into the Q&A. We'd love to hear from you, and we will check your responses. Do not feel like you have to filter yourself here. One point of confidence and one thing that maybe you're not feeling as confident about in the college essay writing process. All right, so would anybody like to share? You can also raise your hand if you wish, or Mindy and I can give you something that typically comes about, which is anxiety around picking the topic. That's absolutely something that we hear frequently. And that, you know, people want to have the topic that stands out the most to the college admission committee. They oftentimes feel that there's this need to be the most unique. We'll definitely address that. One point of confidence that we often hear is maybe I enjoy writing, or that's something that I consider to be a strength of mine academically. And so that's always nice for a student who feels like this is their opportunity to really highlight something that they feel is going to really explain to us why they could be a good fit at our universities. And if you have any other thoughts, feel free to continue to put them into the chat box or into the Q&A as you have those thoughts and as they come into your mind. We'd love to hear from you. But we did kind of go through a compilation, Mindy and I, of you know, some of the things that we hear the most from students. So I'll pass it to you, Mindy, now.
All right. So I put myself in your footsteps to try to think of what topics made me anxious when I was writing a college essay many eons ago. But I think in terms of the college essay, a lot of students are stressed out about that just because, one, you know, we're all human beings, we're very busy, and not only are you busy with schoolwork, you're also busy personally within your home life. You might be helping your parents and everything. And so I think part of it is just the procrastination. And sometimes it's okay to procrastinate. It gives you time to think about potentially what topics you want to write about, and also give you time to consider what colleges you want to apply to as well. So it's okay to procrastinate a little, and I understand that will cause a little anxiety to some students. And then also, first off, I do want to say that for those of you who English is a second language, give yourself a pat on the back. I think that is amazing that you are able to write an essay for a college application in a different country with a language that is not your mother tongue. And so I think one thing for me as an admission counselor is that sometimes I am not looking for that perfect essay. I enjoy reading essays from international students just because they do carry a flavor, just particularly from their country and how they learn English when they were in school. So it is okay, even if you have one misspelled word, or even if you phrase something differently that doesn't translate directly into English, that is okay. And then also applying to the US, and some of you are probably applying to other countries as well. You may not be aware of what those expectations are from that particular country. And so that might cause a little anxiety in terms of what if I apply to the US and they're looking for, you know, a certain topic, or they're looking for a certain style of writing, and I'm not familiar with that. And like Beth Ann mentioned earlier, you know, use your style and just write what comes to mind. Sometimes those are some of the best essays. And also, you know, in addition to balancing many priorities with school life and your personal life, I think there's also the pressure coming from teachers and parents, you know, asking you, when are you completing your application to, you know, X university, and how is that process going? I am sure you get a lot of questions from relatives about your plans for next year. So of course, there is a lot coming from all different angles. And then also writing an essay, of course, is probably not the most exciting thing for most high school students. is where to start. Do I just, pick a day and just sit in front of my computer and start writing? Or do I just take bits and pieces and write a little bit each day? Is that the best strategy? And of course, we could share some of our ideas in terms of, the best ways to begin this. But I do not write my essays like all in one sitting. I like to write a little bit, come back around, and then I'll think of something new. And then also, I think Beth Ann will mention this later on in the presentation. How does this fit into the big picture? Why is that essay important? Do I really need to write it? So with that, I think I'll pass it back to Beth Ann.
Yeah, fantastic transition. And so we just wanted to take a step back to show you that the essay is not the only factor that we're using when making our admission decisions. It is one piece of the puzzle. It is a factor among many that we are using to practice what we call a holistic admission review process. If you're interacting with especially smaller or medium-sized institutions in the United States, especially ones that focus on the liberal arts and sciences style and philosophy of education, you are often going to hear that term holistic admission review. And what that really means is that we are looking at the balance of all of these admission requirements that we're asking for you to submit, because each of them has an equal value. So when we look at the platforms that most universities in the United States accept, you submit an application typically through the Common Application or the Coalition Application. What's really nice about this is that many different universities partner with these platforms, which means that you only have to fill out your information once, and it's received by most of the schools that you're hoping to apply to. We'll also be spending a lot of our time focusing on your transcript, the record of your performance in the classroom or on exams. And so one of the changes that we've certainly seen, and I know we were speaking earlier about, how has the pandemic changed things and what does that mean for the United States application process? One of the big things is that many schools are no longer requiring standardized testing. And by that, I mean the SAT or the ACT. Most times, if English is not your native language, we will still be looking for some evidence of language proficiency, which can sometimes be used through an examination like the TOEFL or the Duolingo English test, the IELTS exam. There's a few different options out there, so ask each institution. But one thing that we're not using as heavily, and I think this is in part good news for our international students, is that standardized testing piece. So be sure you're asking each of your institutions what their policy is, but we'd much rather get a sense of who you are inside and outside of the classroom through things like recommendation letters and people who know you well speaking to the contributions that you've made both academically and co-curricularly through the places where you've decided to dedicate your time. I won't go too far into this, but most institutions are also need aware in our admission process, which means that one of the things we'll be asking for you to do is submit a documentation that lets us know what you're able to contribute to your university education so that we can know how we might be able to use our budget to support you. So of all these things that I've mentioned, the one thing I haven't mentioned is, of course, the essay. And the essay is my personal favorite part because it is the one and only space where you get to speak directly to the admission counselor reading that application, to the committee of individuals ultimately making the decision about who you are. And this is kind of your time to brag about yourself a little bit. And I know that feels very uncomfortable and very unnatural, but the thing that really stands out to us the most is that amid all of these numbers and these documents on academics and where you've dedicated your time through extracurriculars, we want to hear your voice. And so what is the purpose of the essay? And Mindy, I'll kick it to you.
Absolutely. So Beth Ann actually alluded to this a little in terms of branding yourself. And if I were to go up to any one of you in terms of asking, hey, what cell phone should I buy? Mine just broke. Is there one that I should purchase because of what it's known for? And you may probably tell me, oh, buy the iPhone or the Samsung Galaxy or something like that, because you know what that brand does. You understand that behind that cell phone, you know that it has X number of capabilities, like it has great camera function or whatsoever. That's the same with your essay. And like we mentioned before, we read thousands of applications every single year. And so when you're looking at a large group of students, what will make you stand out within the pool? And so I think one thing I always like to tell students is that, you know, what makes you special? And let's say, for example, you're applying to an engineering program and you want to show the admission committee that ever since you were a kid, you love building Legos and breaking things apart and putting them back together. Maybe you like telling that story of how you have that creative mind, and you're applying to a school that's maybe an art school, and you want to talk about describing like a piece of painting or piece of art and utilize your creativity skills that way. Or maybe you're just one that really loves to tell a story and you want to brand yourself as someone who fits in a certain campus community, that you're fun and that you love telling stories to your peers. And so it's really about you. And when you think about it, if we look at a group of students and every single student has, let's say, the same records, academic records, and they have the same test scores, what else can we look at to differentiate all those different students? And so that next thing we'll look at is the essay. And that plays an important role in terms of whether or not we want to admit a student. And sometimes, let's say, for example, a student is borderline and you know, the admission committee is on the edge in terms of, oh, should we admit the student? Should we not admit the student? And based off of the essay, the admission committee is like, you know what, I think the student has a lot more to offer than what the academics on paper says about that student. And so that's part of your brand. And just like cell phones, not all cell phones are perfect. You look at all the different categories, like the cell phone, the picture potential might not be as clear, but it has a large memory. And this cell phone, it may have like, you know, sharp pictures and sharp pixels, but at the same time, it doesn't store as much. So, you know, both are still great phones, and it just depends on the user. And that user, whether it be at any institution, may select one student based off of their application essay. And so, yes, it really makes a difference in terms of having that essay as part of the application. And also, just keep in mind, not all institutions require essays. Some do. And for those that don't, they might make it optional. So if you do want to submit additional information about yourself, you certainly could do so. But one thing we always like to say is that, you know, we have all different types of fishes that come into our pool, our applicant pool. You could be a clownfish, you could be a betta fish, you could be a catfish, but who exactly are you within this pool of fish or school of fish? And so I think this really makes you truly unique. And, you know, like Beth Ann mentioned, I understand even for me, it's hard to brag about myself, but you know, when it comes to competing against all the fishes, you know, within this large ocean, I think it really makes sense to really make yourself stick out, tell us a good story. And at the end of the day, we're human beings on the other end of the application. I love reading stories, and sometimes I learn about things that I never knew, you know, existed. And so not only are we as admission counselors admitting students into our school, but at the same time, we're learning a lot from your personal essay as well. So with that, I'll pass it along to Beth Ann.
Awesome. I love the cell phone and the fish analogy. And so true. And I think, you know, one of the common obstacles that we sometimes find students falling into is that they fixate on trying to guess what we want to hear from them, instead of writing something that they're really excited to write about or that they feel is reflective of their personality. And I want to make that point that, you know, a university application essay is much more similar to the type of writing you're going to do in a university setting when you get there. It is reflective, it is edited, it is planned, it is thoughtful. And so for us, it's a really quick and easy snapshot of, can you handle the rigor and the level of academic and personal writing that will be expected of you in a university setting in the United States? So just a few kind of items to add to what you already very articulately covered. So we wanted to dive into just what are the prompts out there? What are we asking you to respond to? And we're going to focus on the common application because, again, those are the types of institutions that we represent. This is what we kind of know and the the questions that we are typically asking in our process. So this year, these are the 2022-23 Common Application prompts. You only need to pick one to respond to, but what we do hope that you're going to do is actually respond to that specific question. So you have the freedom of choice for a reason, and that's because not everyone's writing style is exactly the same, and not everyone's life experiences are exactly the same. Now, I have highlighted a key here as you look through this list, and those are the words that are in red. So you might notice, and feel free to shout in the chat or in the Q&A box if something stands out to you here, but you might notice that there's a common factor between all of these statements. What is meaningful to your beliefs? What prompted your thinking? What did you learn? What affected or motivated you? Personal growth, something that captivated you, and a topic of your choice. What's the word that's in common here? It is you. So not to be too repetitive in this, but again, what we're ultimately hoping to get a sense of through your essay is not necessarily someone close to you or a story about someone that influenced you, although sometimes that goes together, but really what has been the impact on you personally. Now, typically when students look through this list, there is going to be one that sticks out positively. That might be because there's an anecdote that came into your mind or a story that you said, oh, I really, the first thing I thought of when I read this was this. And you really want to trust your instincts, because most times if there was a particular one that jumped out at you, that's the one that is going to be easiest for you to write, because it's going to be the one that is most authentic to yourself. So if you are reading through this list right now and you find that there is one that you're gravitating to, trust yourself. You will also find that this seventh option here is freedom of your choice. So it is not a specific prompt that we're asking you to respond to. You can do anything that you want to write on. And I will share that that is actually the most commonly selected prompt that we read, because students think that it's going to be a little bit easier, but I encourage you to think about your creative process. Sometimes that open-ended nature can be very overwhelming and very daunting to try to approach. And you might surprise yourself that you might operate a little bit more easily when you have a few more details and a little bit more structure around the questions being asked. So another exercise that you can do is sit down and just start writing 1 minute in response to each of these prompts and see which one comes the easiest to you. And that can be your sign of which writing style, whether that's that open-ended number 7 or those more specific number 1 through 6 might be good for your style, and which one might have something to say. You might have something to say within it. So that's one exercise I would definitely recommend doing as well. And at the end of the day, I can't say this enough. I think Mindy shares the sentiment as well, but it's not the topic itself that matters. It is the way that you write and what we are learning about you in that process. So take the pressure off of yourself to say, I have to have something written that they have never heard before, because chances are we probably heard it or we've encountered some version of it, and that's okay. We're in fact asking you to respond to the same exact questions. So that's going to happen, but each person is going to have a different application or takeaway or lesson learned or influence on themselves that they can articulate and share, and that's going to be different from person to person. So not the topic that matters, but definitely how you write and whether you reflect a strength of writing and an ability, again, to put together a university level piece. Anything to add on that, Mindy?
Well, I also do want to say one thing about what Beth Ann mentioned about the Common App prompts. This is a prelude to your future job interviews, because a lot of interviews will ask those same questions. They will ask what motivates you. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? If you experience a challenge, what steps have you taken to overcome that challenge? So if you can master this right now, you're going to be a really good interviewer come 4 years after graduation. So I think it's very intentional in terms of how we ask those questions, but I think that what Beth Ann mentioned is completely right. It's really about you. And again, don't worry about what your friend writes about. worry about, what you want to write. And, you could be one out of an entire class of 20 people in your classroom, and they all choose like topic number 3, but you're the only one that wants to do topic number 6. And that is completely okay. And who knows, you might have a higher chance of getting into your dream school just because you went off the beaten path and you're writing about something that you're truly passionate about.
Awesome. I do want to take a moment. There are 2 questions in the Q&A, and I think we can quickly address them. One is about the difference between the application essay and institutional specific essays. So we actually do have a slide coming up on supplemental essays. That's the other term you'll sometimes hear them referred to, or institution specific questions, and kind of how we approach those. So stay tuned. And the other question is a little bit more specific to the graduate school application. Typically that's a personal statement. So I will put the caveat out there that we are speaking specifically more to the undergraduate application process right now, but I think that many of the things that we are sharing really hold true at the graduate application stage. Typically at that point, there is going to be a more specific program that you are seeking admission to. And so my recommendation would be still be personal, still share your story, but really think about the why behind what has led you to the choice of that particular graduate school or that particular graduate program. Because ultimately, we're asking for essays because we want to determine if we could see you as community members. Would you be a good person to have next to a classmate in a discussion-based environment? Would you be, in the undergraduate level typically, a good roommate, a good peer to have, a good community member? So these value sets and these ideas of the why behind why you are applying are really true no matter whether you're at the undergraduate level or the graduate level. So I think many of these things are definitely applicable. All right, so we thought it would be fun to show you some sample essays because sometimes examples help. So I will also put the caveat out here that these are just excerpts. They are a portion of an essay. They're not an entire essay. So you might be coming into the middle of it, but we're going to read them aloud to you. And we'll also display them on the screen so that you can read along as well. And we'd love to hear your thoughts if you have them on what you enjoy about the essay, maybe what you didn't enjoy so much about the essay. We're not going to lead you in any direction as to whether we like these or we don't. We'd love to hear from you first. But I'm going to start with one I have titled The Wicked Witch of the West. And so it goes. The first time I died, I was clad in a long black robe, complete with a pointy black hat and a fake wart, which had been subtly attached to the tip of my nose. Almost 200 people watched as I melted to the floor, murdered by a girl named Dorothy, who was armed with a deadly and dangerous weapon that was indeed a bucket of water. Having never read a script or set foot on a stage in my life, but not one to stray away from the comfort zone of my friends, I auditioned for the school play alongside my usual pack of friends. I was secretly plotting ways to sabotage my chances of getting a part that required doing more than standing on a discreet corner of the stage without speaking. I never thought that the director, Miss Bennett, would discern that what she apparently thought was major role material in a brown-haired 13-year-old introvert. But when the cast list went up a few days later, I felt sick to my stomach as I read my name printed next to my role as the Wicked Witch of the West. So in this particular musical that the student is alluding to, that is one of the lead characters. So I would love to hear, again, if you have any thoughts, feel free to type them into the chat or the Q&A. If you liked something in particular, if you didn't like anything in particular, would love to hear your impressions. But I will also share my own, which is that I do think that this essay, first and foremost, tells a story. It's very descriptive. I have a very strong sense of the student's voice and also a moment of growth that was experienced because they came into a school musical audition and thought it was going to go one way where they could kind of hide in the corner and were challenged to think differently. So I find that this particular essay both shows, again, a sense of openness, even on something they may have been nervous to do, but also, really is not trying to be beyond their age. By that, I mean, they're really speaking authentically in terms of where they were in this moment. They're not trying to put a professional persona on because they know a college admission officer is reading this. They're just sharing the story as they experienced it. So those are some things that stand out positively. There's a lot of words in here. There's some big words here. Sometimes I do also wonder, you know, are those words you use in your everyday language? And so always be conscious of not feeling like you're sitting down and always selecting new word choice, new word choice, new word choice to be able to just make it sound more intense than it actually is. But those are some of my observations. And I think ultimately I would have a very good sense of how this student might come to a campus and contribute to trying new clubs and activities, or to really kind of gaining a presence by being willing to go outside of their comfort zone. So that's my takeaway as well. We'll read another example, very different this time. And Mindy, I'll turn it to you.
All right. Well, huge disclaimer first. I would not be able to do the Australian accent as good as Beth Ann, but I will, you know, go ahead and use my regular American accent about the wrestler in Australia. So let me go ahead and get started. On our last night in Australia, we wandered down a side street in Sydney in the brash state of mind that seduces people to do things they'll later regret. After months of self-discipline, our wrestling team was celebrating our first place finish. A grueling training and travel schedule had forged a tight bond among our team, and our victory added a raucous energy. Plus, we were 10,000 miles away from home, unchaperoned, and in a country that isn't hung up on concepts like parental consent. Matt, the 6 feet 4-inch farm boy, 6 foot 4-inch farm boy, paused outside a small, brightly lit shop. Come on, mates, he drawled in an imitation Australian accent. We're all getting tattoos. Inside, he leaned over me. So what will it be, Jake? A great white? He grinned. Or a widow koala? Mentally, I listed my reasons why I didn't want a tattoo. 1, the risk of medical complications, like my tattooed arm being severed from my body by my mom. 2, my mom permanently grounding the rest of me. 3, needles. 4, the old guy at the pool whose tattoos were faded, shriveled, and nasty. And 5, fear that someday people would point at me and say, there goes a tattooed homeless man, instead of there goes that well-groomed Nobel Prize winner. As my finger hovered between designs, I glanced out the window, noticing a shop across the street. You know what? I said, there's something else I want, and I don't have enough cash left for both. As I started across the street toward the didgeridoo store, oh my gosh, this is like such a word that I have to pronounce. I realized that buying one was as impulsive and impractical as getting a tattoo, but it's a choice I'm glad I made. Like my body, my didgeridoo is on the small side and unadorned, and like me, it is powerful, distinctive, and good at bugging my little brother. Well, first thoughts about this essay. I learned something new. I had to Google what is a didgeridoo, and to find out that it's a flute-like instrument. So I did not know what that was. And 1, you know, back to my admission counselor roots of learning something new through the personal essays. And then 2, I really thought this essay was good because it brought some humor into the essay writing. And then I love how the student used examples, and even just like the first paragraph really pulled me in. And like I mentioned earlier in the session is that, you know, we're both human beings on the other side of the desk, and we love a good essay. And I think, you know, this essay really does a good job in really entertaining the person on the other end of the table. So that's what really stuck out to me in terms of this essay. I thought this was a good one. But Beth Ann, if you had any other thoughts, because you know you brought this essay in, but I really enjoyed reading this one and learning something new. So
Yeah, I love that you learned something new. I was a music student, so I knew what the didgeridoo was, but I appreciated that this student went against what his friends were doing, was willing to be that, divergent perspective. That shows me, again, what type of person he might be, that he's not going to just go with the crowd for the sake of going with the crowd. He didn't want a tattoo, he wanted a musical instrument. That's pretty cool. But yeah, everything that Mindy shared, I think, is what stands out to me. Humor. One thing to note, you don't have to be humorous in your essay if you're not a naturally humorous person. I'd like to think sometimes I'm funny, but maybe not in writing. So I know that for myself, that probably wouldn't be the approach that I took. But this student, that seems to be a big part of his personality, and that really came through. So again, I think between the previous essay and this essay, you can just see how very different the styles and the approaches are between these two students, and both of them stand out mostly positively in different ways. So I hope you found that helpful. And I know there's a lot of terminology here that is maybe hard to translate, but yeah, we encourage you to watch this back as a recording and continue to benefit from these examples. So how do you get started? Now we've talked about kind of some different angles. We've showed you some examples. We've told you how we use this essay. What's a starting point? And so this is a fun exercise that comes from a book called Write Your Way In, and the author of that book is Rachel Torr. So a really wonderful resource if you're ever curious or interested. But she suggests doing a brainstorming exercise just to get some ideas on paper. And her suggestion is to make a list of 20 possible topics. So quite literally, give yourself a timer of 10 minutes and no more. Write down the first 20 topics, or even the first 15 topics that come to your mind. And what you often find is that the very first few on your list tend to be very surface level. They might be your more obvious elements. So I love basketball, or I had a great community service experience where I helped others and I learned that that can be fruitful. I love both the sciences and the humanities. Okay, now we're starting to get a little interesting. And what she really points out is that the deeper down into your list you get, the more unique the items are going to be to you, and they can really tell something big about you in a way that might be unexpected. So I love number 11. I'm worried about garbage. We should all be worried about garbage, right? But that's a fascinating way to say that. Like it keeps me up at night thinking about issues of sustainability. That could be a really fantastic start to an essay. I keep locking my keys in my car. Okay, number 16, we're a little bit deeper down in the list here. What does that say about you? How have you used your forgetfulness to be, learning how to keep organization in other aspects of your life? There are some really interesting elements that we could pull from this list. And all this is to say, your first few topics might be the right choice, but I encourage you to think a little bit deeper down in your list of these elements that come to your mind, because those are typically the ones that tend to be just a little bit more personal. And that's really what we're hoping to get. So there's a line, don't share anything overly personal, but I think, again, these are some pretty good neutral examples that can share something different. So we wanted to leave you with a few tips and just kind of lessons learned to summarize, some of what we've discussed today. So I'll let Mindy take the first few.
Great. So number one tip I would share is the word count matters. And, like we shared earlier, admission counselors and admission committees, they're very busy going through many applications, and some schools I know of will probably take one paragraph and just read that part. And all right, we'll decide whether or not the student is capable of writing a good piece of writing, or for the common application, you do have a word limit, and so be mindful of that. And it's also important to get your point across when there's a certain word limit, just because one, it shows that you're able to gather your thoughts together and organize your writing, and two, that you are following instructions. So when you're going through the writing, yes, it's okay at the beginning to write as much as you can, but then organize it after you go through your brainstorming session. The second tip is know your audience. Now, I'll use this one example. There's nothing wrong with using slang or current terminology that between you and your classmates that you may be familiar with. But as long as you explain what that particular slang or that particular terminology means to the reader, I think that is completely okay. It's only when you leave the reader hanging, and then they're probably like, oh, well, what is the student talking about? And as long as you understand that on the other end of the desk, someone else is reading your essay that might not be familiar with terminology that you may use every single day with your peers. And then addressing the prompt. One thing I noticed about, let's say, for example, common application prompts is that there are several parts to it, and some students just decide to write only answer part of the prompt. And one example is the prompt about overcoming a challenge. Some students, when they write the essay, oh, this is my challenge, and that's the end of the essay. But what about the steps that you took to overcome that challenge? What was the result of you taking those steps and the outcome? It doesn't necessarily have to be a good outcome, but at least you kind of take the reader full circle in terms of walking them through the process and your thought process in solving that problem. So just my tips in terms of, how to make that essay a little better. So with that, I'll let Beth Ann share the other three.
Sure, and all good tips from Mindy. So another one that we really recommend is just sharing it with someone that knows you well and is a trusted resource to you. That might be a teacher, that might be a friend, that might be a family member. But when you have a draft of your essay that you feel fairly good about, leave your hands, give it to someone else and ask them what they learned. Ask them, how does it sound like me? That's a really key question to ask. And so they can also help to catch any grammatical errors. So I'm actually jumping ahead in tips, but proofreading and making sure that you're going through and making sure that there are not grammatical or huge spelling errors. We understand again that English is the second language. We are using this in part to make sure that, again, you are up to a level of English proficiency that we would feel confident putting you into one of our classrooms, but we're also fairly gracious in understanding that there might be a slight phrasing that may not be completely perfect, and that's okay. We get where you're coming from, and we tend to have a fairly good understanding of that. But do try to proofread and make it as polished as you are able. And then lastly, don't try to do too much. I always sigh when I see a student approach a very big topic in 650 words, which is typically the space that is allotted for you to write your essay. And they say, I'm going to address, all of global warming. And I'm going to provide the solution to global warming in 650 words. Well, if we were able to do that, I think we'd be in a very different place, right? So try to pick a smaller angle of that, and that list brainstorm can be helpful in that. What is that one specific element or angle or story or moment in time that you want to tell us to share that greater picture vision? But don't try to do too much in that one space. And then one other recommendation, and this is again just an exercise, a check that you can do, is that trusted source that you give your essay to, ask them to summarize it for you in just about a sentence. And I ask them what that sentence is. The reason why I say that is because when we as admission officers receive your essays, typically we are reading an application, I'd say in like 7 to 10 minutes. And I know that sounds brief, but we're very practiced at this. And we promise we're giving it a very thorough review in that time. But when we are reading your essay, we then make notes to bring back to our colleagues to represent what we learned about you and from that essay in about a sentence or two. So if that peer or that source can repeat it back to you and it's translating what you want it to say and they learned something about you that you wanted them to learn, then great. That probably is a good sign that your essay is where it needs to be and ready to be submitted. And then we did promise talking a little bit about supplemental essays. So we'll try to keep it brief in the interest of time. Yeah, Mindy, do you want to go over this quickly?
All righty. So that was a great question. Thank you so much for the audience member who submitted that question. Is that yes, sometimes, let's say, for example, you're filling out the common application, you're already done with that essay, but then you realize you're applying to a school that has a supplemental essay, and sometimes that's optional. Maybe some of you are very ambitious and you want to get into an honors program. sometimes those honors programs will require an additional essay, because it's very similar to the example I used earlier. When students who are applying to these high ability programs, usually their academics are already very strong. And so the committee will look at the essay next. And then also sometimes it will make a difference in your scholarship awarding, because some scholarships, for example, let's say the You Are Welcome Here scholarship, several institutions across the US will offer this scholarship, and there is an additional essay that you have to submit to be considered for that essay. There are also some full scholarship programs available through some other institutions that also require an essay. And, you know, in that aspect, it really helps you to not only one, help in your admissions, but two, also help you with scholarship awarding and how much you could receive from a particular institution. So that would be the difference. Some students will choose to submit an optional essay, other students don't. It just really depends if, you know, who doesn't like a good scholarship, or, you know, or even for honors programs. Not every student wants to be in an honors program, and that will be an example where you don't necessarily have to submit that optional essay. So that's the reason why it matters, is to really look through all the institutions and, you know, ask the University of Richmond if they have, you know, any additional scholarship opportunities that require an essay, and then, you know, maybe ask, you know, if you're applying to Miami University, you know, what additional essays they have as well. So.
And I think the main rule of thumb is also spend an equal amount of time crafting your supplemental essays, or your, you know, major specific essays, whatever it might be that's being asked of you, as you do on that common application essay. The hardest one to approach, I think, is that like classic why this school, because it's very open-ended, right? But what we're hoping to see is that you've done some research, you've accessed virtual visit opportunities, you've actually learned why this might be a good fit for you, and you are using that space to be thoughtful and articulate about that specific school. Because when you get a supplemental essay in particular, it is only going to that school. Whereas the common application essay is being read by all the schools on your list that you're applying to. So that is also a difference in that, you know, we're asking for it for a reason. And sometimes it is to get a sense of why that particular institution has made it onto your list. The final portion that we want to just very briefly address is this COVID-19 question. There are actually two places on the application where you have more of like an open-ended ability to put anything that didn't really fit elsewhere. One is called additional information, very straightforward. So if there was anything that would leave us with a question or leave us wondering that you want to make sure is not a question for us, you have a short paragraph space that you can let us know what that might be. And the other is the COVID-19 question. This is something that came up since the pandemic that is really designed, I'll speak just for the applicant side, for you to be able to articulate anything above and beyond the norm in terms of the impact of COVID on your life. So if it's typical things like maybe my class offerings changed, or I wasn't able to participate in many things outside of school, those are pretty standard experiences, to be perfectly honest. And so we get that. And most times students are not going to have something to fill out in this space. So just because it is an available option, you do not have to feel obligated to fill something out just because it's there. So only if there is some exceptional circumstance that you think is really critical to the admission committee to know about. And then lastly, resources. We're throwing a few up here. Ask us as admission officers. I see some questions coming into the chat already, which is great. And we'll definitely try to get to those. A lot of admission officers also have like blog posts or forums where you can get advice directly from that admission office. One of my favorite resources out there is actually Johns Hopkins University. They have a section of their website called Essays That Worked, and they do kind of what we just did with those essays. They'll have like a little example essay, and then they'll actually put the notes that their admission committee made about what stood out to them and what their summation was. So that's a really helpful resource too. And then of course, EducationUSA. You have a wonderful resource in EducationUSA, and we do encourage you to utilize that. So before we get to questions, we're going to very briefly just talk a little bit about our institutions. I know we've just talked at you for a little bit, and you know our university names, but you might not know a ton about us. So And we can slide back to our contact information if you'd like to chat with us. But I'd love to give Mindy the first platform to share.
Right. Thank you, Beth Ann. So hi, everyone. So my name is Mindy again from Miami University, located in Oxford, Ohio. Now, I know a lot of students get us confused with University of Miami in Florida. So we are two very different institutions. Our colors are red and white, and the other institution is green and orange. So that's a sure way of telling which school you are applying to if you do end up, deciding to come to Miami University. So we are located in the state of Ohio, and we are a mid-sized institution, a little under 19,000 students, but a majority of our students are undergraduate students. We have a very small graduate student population, which is great because that means research opportunities will go directly to you as a first-year student or second, third, fourth year, depending on when you want to start your research. And we also have over 100 plus majors that you could select from, with some of our most popular majors being in our Farmer School of Business, not for farmers, it's just the name of the building that our business program is located in. And we also are strong in computer science and engineering. So those are some of the top majors if you were to consider Miami University. And for us, I think I'll leave you with a fun fact. So Miami University, we were not named after the city of Miami. We were established as a university before the state of Florida even established themselves. And so we were named after the Native Americans. They're called the Miami tribe. And so after we built a university on the land where they used to live, we named it Miami University in honor of them. So with that, I'll pass it back to Beth Ann to share a little bit more about University of Richmond.
Much like reading essays, I love hearing other university reps speak about their schools because I always learn something new. So that's really fascinating about the history of your name. So I'll keep it very brief. University of Richmond, we are a private liberal arts and sciences institution, and we are among the top 25 in the United States. We're very proud, first and foremost, of our beautiful campus. We do hold one of the top rankings for one of the prettiest places to attend university in the United States. But better than that, we are small, which means intimate experiences in terms of getting to know your professors and your classmates. We're only 3,000 students. We're also suburban, so you actually have city access paired with a enclosed residential campus community. So those are some of our basics. The one thing that we really pride ourselves on is a very unique policy, which is that you actually cannot declare what you're studying until you get to your second year enrolled at the university. So we really do encourage academic exploration. Some of the programs we're known for, business definitely is up there, as well as our School of Leadership Studies. We were the first to ever create an undergraduate program in the study of leadership, and we like to think that we're fairly established in it as a result. We also, if you come to Richmond, you have no excuse not to have an internship or a research experience. We're going to fund you through our university up to $5,000 US to make that happen over a summer. So doors are really open to you to not only take your classroom learning and apply it within the classroom, but really take it beyond the classroom as well with that financial support. And we love interdisciplinary education. So most of our students, many of our students are going to be studying more than one academic discipline when they come to our campus. And many of them will also have global experiences. So close to 70% of our students choose to go abroad. I know this is kind of an abroad experience already for some of you, but you might go abroad again. And our international center is actually in my Zoom background, which is home to international education and student support. So that's the very quick high level of the University of Richmond. And I do see that some questions have already popped into the Q&A. So hopefully we can address these efficiently and make sure we kind of stay on time here to the best of our ability.
Hello, sorry, Beth and Mindy, for interrupting. Thank you so much for your great presentation. When you answer those questions, can you please read out the questions first so that people can hear? Thank you.
Absolutely. So I'll just start with the first one that's coming to my mind here, which is, can you tell me the do's and don'ts of college essays, general advice? So I think we've covered a lot of do's and don'ts in the course of our conversation here, but so maybe we can each share one. I think the do is what we've been saying, which is show your personality. Do write what you're excited to write. Don't write what you think we want to hear. Mindy, anything to add on that?
I would also, I'll start with a don't first. You don't have to feel like you have to use big words that even for us as admission counselors, we don't use every day. I know some students think that impresses admission counselors, but I think it makes it sound unnatural in your essay. And then I would recommend, sitting down and brainstorming and just, really take it at your own pace. Don't pressure yourself that, oh, I need to write it all in one sitting, walk back and forth. And sometimes you get some new ideas off of that.
Great advice. And I think this is related. So what do you think about asking for outside assistance in preparing college application essays? Can you tell when outside assistance has been received when reading them? That's a really good question. In short, typically, yes. It can be pretty evident when outside support has been sought. And the place that becomes most evident sometimes is a difference in the descriptions on the activities and the quality of the essay writing. And that is not to say go seek external support on writing your activities resume either, but we want this to come from you. We want this to be your piece of writing. It really needs to be from you. So in the sense of asking someone else to read it, to share, some quick edits maybe to make sure it's as strong as it can be, but to overwrite your voice or to write it for you, certainly do not seek outside support in that manner. Would be my summation.
I would add that, talk to your teachers or a trusted adult instead of using a additional service, because I think your money could be used in other ways instead of paying for these services. And I think, especially within your high school, I think you have a lot of resources that are already there for you. And just, sit down with your teacher and maybe have another pair of eyes look over it. I think that will do wonders for your essay versus having a service assist you with that portion.
Mm-hmm. And we really trust EducationUSA. So if you're working with an EducationUSA advisor, we love that. We know what that means, and that is a trusted source for us as well. I'm just going to field questions. Mindy, you can chime in first on this one. So one of the questions is, I heard that extracurricular activities are essential in writing essays, but due to COVID, sometimes it isn't easy to do and access those typical extracurriculars. So is there any advice about how the extracurriculars and the essay kind of play together?
Yeah, absolutely. So Beth Ann mentioned earlier about the holistic review process, which I'm a true believer of that. I really think that we take into consideration all aspects of the application. And in the common application, there's a section for all your extracurricular activities. And then there's the common essay portion of it where you select a prompt. And they are two different components. So your essay, it could be about something about you personally, like we mentioned earlier about like the prompts and talking about yourself, what motivates you, what are you passionate about. Extracurricular activities, it's not really about the quantity, like, oh, if I list 20 different extracurricular activities, it makes me a good applicant, but not necessarily, because on a common application, they'll ask how many hours per week do you spend in that activity. And sometimes we would rather take a student who spent 20 hours as part of a member of this organization versus another student listing, 20 different activities, like maybe 1 hour in each of those particular activities. And so it's really about the quality and what you've done. And even for those of you who probably have only like one organization or two organizations or extracurriculars, you might be in a leadership position, and that makes up for not having like, 30 other extracurricular activities listed. So it's okay. If you see an empty space, like after listing one extracurricular activity on the Common App, that is completely fine. So my advice is, again, be yourself. And this is true to you. This is your story. And you know, I would rather you not make up a whole bunch of other activities just to fill up the spot. So
yeah, a good resume does not have to mean a long resume. Absolutely. I think that's so true. And I have nothing to add, honestly. Mindy covered it very well. So I hope that's helpful to you. Last question that we had come into the chat, into the Q&A here is which part of the common application should be started to be prepared first? And what kind of writing styles would be preferred in writing the application essays? The narrative style seems to be predominant. So I'll start, that's a two-part question, but the first part, which is what should you start preparing first? That's going to be different from one student to the next. I don't think there's any one method that is better or preferred than another, but the thing that is going to take typically the most time is the essay. Especially when you're saying, okay, I have a common application essay, but I have 3 schools that I'm applying to, and each one of them are asking for a supplemental essay, and none of them are the same. In fact, we hope that you're not using the same essay on repeat for supplemental essays. We can usually tell that too. So I do think allowing yourself, and Mindy spoke to this earlier in the presentation about the procrastination element, allowing yourself breathing room and space to take a pause and be reflective and think about what you want to write, but making sure that you also are keeping track of your deadlines and working towards them, because the essays do take time. The rest of it is kind of out of your control at this point. Your academic record is your academic record. And yes, we'll be looking at your current academic progress and continuing to track that. But a lot of the years of what we're using in our review have already been completed. You can control whether or not you choose to take an SAT or an ACT exam sometimes if it's accessible to you in your area. That's within your control. Who you ask to write a letter of recommendation is within your control, but there's nothing more in your control than the college essay. So that's why I do think that's a good place to start early. Maybe not start first if that's not your style, but start early at least. And then what kind of writing styles would be preferred? Whatever feels unique to you. There's no one writing style that's better than another. We showed you 2 very different examples of writing styles that could not be more far apart, really, and both had validity and both were enjoyable to read. It should be I-focused. So you're writing about yourself. So in that sense, yes, narrative tends to be the mainstream because we're hoping that you are narrating something about yourself. And that just kind of goes naturally together. But just because a lot of people are doing that does not mean that that's less valid or that that's gonna not hold our attention or anything like that. You know, I've seen students do some more creative elements. I'm sure Mindy also has examples of, you know, screenplays that have been submitted or, you know, music lyrics or something like that. And honestly, you know, those can be great when they're done well. But a more traditional piece of writing that's reflective of, again, a planned, edited, and cohesive example that you can write and that you can reveal something about yourself in the course of doing so. That's more what we're hoping to receive, I think, from the essay. I hope that helps. I hope that answers the question. Starting to feel the 10 p.m. time on us, right? Yeah, thank you all so much for asking such wonderful questions, and I hope that you found those answers to be what you needed from that.
Hello, thank you very much, Beta and Mindy, for the wonderful presentations. We learned so much about, you know, writing good essays, and you know, I really appreciate that your great, you know, presentation as well as the great answers to those questions. Thank you so much again. And thank you for staying up so late at night in your time zone. And I hope you also enjoyed. And then Beta, Richmond is participating in your college fair, right?
I think it may be one of my colleagues who is.
Okay. So I'm sorry, Mindy, but I hope to, you know, work with you again in some other future. So thank you very much, you know, Mindy and Beta. And thank you also for participating participants. I hope everyone enjoyed this webinar. So we will stop the webinar now. Thank you. So please have
a great day.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Stay healthy and safe. Bye.